Um, Today, yeah, I still have the Rembrandt. I have one of those like halo lights because the room that I do these where we just my partner and I just moved actually, so there our sort of our second bedroom is now a office, and uh, the lighting leaves much to be desired. But you'll have to bear with me. So we got the Rembrandt. I know you said you liked it, so today, folks, as people were filtering in, we still have more people arriving, but we're gonna be covering color matching, looking at color fidelity and ACDC. We're gonna look at color correction as well as color matching, and then we're also probably gonna explore LUTs because um, LUTs are a good way to sort of create certain lighting conditions that you want to copy. So, and then use on other images. Very helpful. Yeah. And this is a request from a user in regards to this. So looking at a workshop that's covering contents that was asked for. So as we're still waiting for people to filter in, I'll just mention you can always contact me either in the workshop, while we're doing the workshop, but you can also send me a message over Connect. Um, and what I mean by that is you can request, a workshop that you'd like to have covered, or if there's something that you'd like to see a tutorial of, we're happy to tackle those, depending. So yeah, just shoot me a message over Connect. The way you do that is if you go to our Connect page, and if you go to the workshop itself, if you click on it, my name will be up here, and there will be a means to chat or message me from there. So if you're curious about sending me a message, that's how it works. Not asked, does it include to improve scanned faded color photos with one color cast? It might. What we're looking at today is post-processing editing to do color matching. So we're going to take actually the color, this image here is the one we're going to be here. Let me change the film view. We're going to be looking at taking this image. We're going to first and foremost, we're going to look at how to color correct in ACDSee, and then we're going to look at replicating the unique color circumstances in this image. And we're going to take those and we're going to use both the I guess highlight and shadow colors as reference, and then we're going to apply that color scape to these three images that appear beneath it, to varying degrees, and then we'll look at like how that process works, and then we're gonna sort of automate the process with LUTs or lookup tables, which I've covered a little bit in ACDC, not a ton, but they're pretty handy. So, and it's exactly like what we're talking about today. So, might as well include them as a way to automate and sort of replicate your changes that you've made to one image to others. So, why don't we get started? Mm. Why don't we get started? Okay, so is it possible to have your screen fill out bigger? That this is the screen that you're seeing. This let me see. Let me just double check my sharing. It's probably as big as it gets. Yeah, it's sharing the whole screen. Charles, that's probably on your end. I can't zoom in any further or anything like that in regards to the workshop. I can only display a screen for a webinar, and that's the screen that I'm working with for ACDC here. So I'm thinking probably not. Sorry about that. I also have like maxed my cursor size, and I have a sort of an underlay, or I guess this little mouse click that appears as well, just to improve legibility and following along. But I can't make the screen any larger. It's kind of just a 1920 by 1080. That's what I can project. Okay. Uh, yeah, view doesn't allow us to zoom in as before. Oh, wait a second. Was that a Revert, was that this is sort of tangential to the workshop, but just for my curiosity's sake, from somebody who's viewing the workshop or the webinar, was that an ability that you had previously in Zoom that they have now rescinded or removed? Oh, okay. Interesting. Some other people are suggesting that there's settings that you could apply here. So maybe try those. Sounds like CB, Daniel, and LJ are all making suggestions. So that's a user thing too, where I think like your settings for the for somebody who's watching the webinar is probably different from the settings that I see as a host and presenter. So anyway, I'll let them help you in the comments while we begin the workshop today. It looks like he got it fixed. So nice. Awesome. Okay. What we're doing today can be done in develop mode as well to a certain degree. However, what we're going to be exploring is going to be working with edit mode, especially for a couple of processes, color matching. But I want to just highlight the fact that what we're going to be working with today is the curves tool. And the curves tool is incredible for what I'm about to show you. So let's open up an image in edit mode. I'll just state that the curves tool is very similar in develop mode, so these can be done in develop mode as well. In edit mode, as I've mentioned a couple times, the adjustment layers panel, this panel that you see on the right-hand side here, this is a non-destructive adjustment panel. So non-destructive means that if I was to save this file as an editable file, so an ACDSee file, which I'll just show really quickly. When we go to save a file, we have an option of saving it as an ACDSee file format. ACDSee file formats contain all their corresponding adjustments that you've made during the editing process. So when I say non-destructibility, that's what I'm referring to. So these adjustment layers, note that there is a curves adjustment. So we're going to be working with this curves adjustment in particular, but there's also a curves adjustment displayed in exposure and lighting under tone curves, which is extremely similar in terms of its function. It might even be the same. Let me just double check that really quickly. Yeah, it's the same. Very useful tool. And then I'll just quickly preview this also and develop just so we're doing due diligence here, but this curves adjustment is also visible in tone curves. It has a different name here, but it's tone curves, and it's the same again. It gives you very, very similar interaction points as in edit mode in either the non-destructive or destructive method. Okay, so let's continue. So there's some lighting conditions in this photo that are pretty obvious right off the bat. It's really warm. It has almost a cool and warm feel to it. It's very pink. It has a real magenta appearance. Now, this is something that we can either problematize in the sense that we don't like it and we want to alter it, or we can copy it and that we like it and we want to systematize what we're seeing. And we can do both of those things. And so when we talk about color matching and color fidelity, we're going to be exploring those things today and exploring copying them. Before I do that, I want to showcase how to do color correction, which is going to be another method by which you interact with images. And they both use the curves tool. So this is a good way to explore using a sort of an underappreciated function of the curves tool. I've never talked about this in a workshop before. This is the first time I'm talking about this. The curves tool is this guy right here, as we mentioned previously. If I click on this, it's going to open an adjustment layer that exists right here. Now, curves, by default, as you can see here, there's this little I guess this triad here, these intersecting triad. This refers to, it's taking the spectrum of visible color, in this case as a screen, RGB, so red, green, and blue, and it's interpreting them together as one unit. And so what we can think about this as is you can make a curves adjustment to light as you see it, because light in this case is this RGB values combined. So we can think about this as a way to adjust essentially brightness in our image. And then we have a curves adjustment. So the curves tool itself is really, really, really incredible. It's a very, very powerful tool, and it gives us the ability to interact with shadows, blacks, midtones, highlights, and whites. And the way that we get to see that and the way that that's visualized is through this method of a histogram. So this histogram is it's essentially a pixel percentage. So it's a percentage of total pixels that appear at certain degrees of brightnesses. And in this case, what it is it's a combination of RGB values together. So if we see this histogram, so when I say histogram, what I'm referring to is actually the center of this with all these little jagged little lines that appear and create this kind of block that you see. So what does this histogram tell us first and foremost? Well, it tells us that there are more shadows and more midtones than there are highlights in this image and whites. In fact, it appears to me that there is no whites in this image. How we would know that is we see this little line that appears both vertically as well as horizontally, and it indicates basically on the left hand side or on the bottom, it indicates that those pixels would be represented by very dark colors. Colors that are closer to the value of 0 than they are the value of 255. Quickly, light is interpreted from a spectrum of 0 to 255, 256 inclusively. So when I say brightness or light, what I'm meaning is that the value of a color uh, basically is at most, at black, it is 0, and at 255, it is a true hue, or it is as bright as it gets. And the way that I think this is a really handy thing to understand in ACDSee, and this foreground color picker. So if I click on the actual foreground box here up at the very top, I'm given this like really interesting interactive tool in the custom tab. And so when we interpret these colors here, we can think of it this way. So basically, an image, or sorry, a color rather, that is a value of 0. So if I take this little positioner right here and I slide it all the way down to the bottom left, you can see that that the B, right, the B value of black, which is in this case, or brightness rather, has a brightness of 0, which indicates to me that there's no light being emitted in this. It's just a true solid black color. And this is also verifiable by the red, green, and blue values that we see on the right here, which indicate to me that these values are zeroed out, which says that the this is a dark, or in this case a black pixel. But if we take these values and we increase them, so if I take this little slider here and I just move it vertically up here, what we can see is these brightness values increase. So they are now the top value. It's 255, which is the brightest a RGB color value can be. And so what we're seeing here is also, if we go over to the RGB values, for example, you can see that they're also the maximum value. And so what that indicates is that the color in this case, which is white, has all three of these values equalized. So a white color is an image that contains RGB values that are full and the same. Now, color, so when I'm talking about tones like white and black, right, like this isn't very useful to you, in the sense the main thing that to consider and to note is that 0 equals black and 255 equals white. Obviously, if we're to choose a color like blue, like we have here, and I pull this little color picker all the way to the top right, which would indicate that it's fully bright, right? But now it is also fully saturated. So that saturation is an indicator of, I guess in this case, the hue, or the true hue coming through. And so what we see here is, okay, so this particular blue at the top right-hand corner here has a red value of 0. So this particular blue hue has no red in it. It does, however, have green and blue. So the green values are middling. They're about 80 to 90 ranges, like in the middle, and then or a little lower than middle actually. And then the blue value is full. It's fully bright in this case, and it is a value of 255. The other thing that's kind of cool is, so when we're looking at RGB, right, these values also tell us some information about the hue, the saturation, and the brightness. So this hue right here, this hue is 156. And this really what it is it's a color code. So if I was to move this color code around, you will see that color code change, right? So orange is about a color code of 12. A fully red, almost magenta red, is closer to 255. And as we were exploring in the blue spectrum here, that was around 150. So this value right here refers to the type of hue that you're seeing. And the eyedropper is, we're actually not in the eyedropper per se. We're in the foreground and background color pickers. So if you double click on this little box that appears in edit mode, this foreground color picker will appear. So it's, don't click the eyedropper. The eyedropper is for displaying the color that's on the canvas. The black in the center here is for bringing up this tool, which allows you to choose a color to interact with. So all I'm trying to showcase is that these RGB values also contain information about which hue they are, how much saturation they have. And in this case, we've been looking at 0 saturation or full saturation, so they're going to be 255 or 0. And we've been looking at pixels that are either fully black or fully white. Now, the complexity begins when you start to move this not from one of its horizons, but rather the center. So if I was to take this color blue, for example, it's the same hue, but now the saturation is changing because I'm desaturating the color. Desaturated colors can be thought of as interacting on this horizontal plane here rather than the vertical plane. So when I hold shift with this color picker and slide it further to the left, the image is becoming desaturated. So desaturated color, right, has a saturation value of 0, and a fully saturated color has a saturation value of 255. And then when that intersects with light, right, we can see that in this case, the saturation isn't changing per se, but when I pull it down, the brightness is lowering. And so my kind of gray-y blue, that's a partially saturated blue, is becoming darker or brighter. Anyway, what this is to say is this is a way to sort of interpret RGB values and to understand brightness, saturation, and the color you're interacting with. If we draw our attention back to this curves histogram, what we can see is that there's these little horizontal and vertical bars that appear on the left and bottom of our histogram. And on the left, it indicates a color that has low brightness. Pardon me. And on the right here, there's a color that is fully bright. And so what this histogram is doing is it's taking all three of those values, it's taking RGB inclusively, and it's displaying them in such a way that we can see the values of this image. So let's actually interpret this histogram. So what this histogram is saying to us is that there is an intense amount of shadows in this image. So these shadows are sort of these colors that we're seeing. And so we're seeing a lot of colors that are very close to, but not equal to black. So these colors are close in the sense that their values will be closer to 0, but they're not equal to 0. And so when we see this massive spike that appears right here, and keep in mind that we're interpreting from the bottom bar here, this spike indicates to us that there's a lot of these very close to color black colors. And then past that, once we get into the shadows here, about this range right here, what we're seeing is that there is a fairly, again, large spike within the shadows, probably from colors like this in our image. And then we start to see it even out around the midtones, which is like this range here, which it's a fairly even distribution until we get to the brighter end of the spectrum where things begin to drop off. Because as you can see, the brightest we see in our image is this pixel here, or maybe this pixel here. So it's okay, Misty. Yeah, we're just sort of getting started here. We're just doing a little bit of, I guess to summarize, we've been talking about RGB values, so red, green, and blue values. We're also talking about saturation and brightness. And the way that we're doing that is because we're looking at this curves window here, and we want to understand the histogram that we're seeing. The curves is a very powerful tool. And in this tool, we're seeing this curves window that indicates to us certain pixel values as they're displayed across a spectrum of dark colors to bright colors. So that's what we've covered so far. But as I mentioned previously, this is a corrective workshop and a color matching workshop. So if we're looking at this image, one of the things that we can say right off the bat, right, is that this image is really pretty pink. It's closer to a magenta in the spectrum, maybe with hints of red worked in. And so, if we're going to match those things, then that's something that we're going to consider, and we're going to want to make copies of the colors that we see or understand the colors we see at both the highlights as well as the shadows. From a corrective point of view, we can also say this as well. We can say, well, if this image is so magenta, how would we go about correcting those values so that we can push more of the opposite values in? And so this brings us to the next point of the curves tool, which is that we've been talking about curves within this context of um, all of those values interpreted together, which is a way of sort of displaying brightness, right? Or displaying sort of an increase of light in your image, right? But what we can also do is you can see that on the left hand panel here that there's these channels. Channels interpret a specific spectrum of light. So in this case, you can see that there's a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel. And so what these values tell us is they'll say, well, when we click on them, right, we're going to see a histogram that is relevant to the color of our selection. So in this case, the histogram that we're dealing with right here is a histogram of red. Based on our histogram, we can see that there's a fair amount of red in the very close to shadows, almost blacks in our image, and then not much elsewhere. Whereas when we click on this green curve, we can see that there is substantial spikes throughout, and it's a bit higher values. And then finally, the blues looks like is pretty substantial as well. So each of these colors comes with a corresponding, I guess you could say, opposite. And this is a really important thing to know about RGB values, is that when we push an opposite color into our composition, we're correcting the image based on the prevalence of a excessive amount of a certain color or spectrum of color. What I mean by that is, if you had an image that was predominantly red, pushing cyan, the opposite of red in this case, would correct for that red. Green, which is the one that we're going to be interacting with today with this particular image, by pushing green into this, green into the spectrum here. In the case that if we had a mostly magenta image, pushing green in will interact as its opposite. Vice versa, if you have an image that's really green, pushing magenta into your image would correct for the existence of that green. And then lastly, the blue interacts with its opposite as yellow. So if your image is too yellow, pushing more blue in, or if your image is too blue, pushing more yellow in will functionally equalize your image and make it appear, I suppose, more true to what the eye would see. So coming back to our image here, and again, this is all subjective, right? Photo editing is subjective. So what I'm about to do might not necessarily look better, but it might equalize the image and make it appear less magenta. So just a caveat that I think when this person who took this photo, which I got as a stock photo, what this person did was probably color correct to add more magenta into this image, because they probably saw this particular landscape and thought like, wow, that color present in this image is so such a characteristic of what I'm feeling and seeing that I want to embolden it, and I want to make it more prevalent in my image. For someone like me who wasn't present for the taking of that photo, I can see this and I can go, oh, well, that's a very, it's a too much pink, so just keep in mind that this is a subjective interaction. So we were talking about curves, and now we're talking about specifically color correcting. So as a part of that, we're sort of getting to color fidelity. I want to understand color correcting first as a method to interact with this. So we said that there's a lot of this magenta-y kind of pinky color in this image here, which we can visualize and see predicated on this big histogram with these big spikes here. What I can do is I can take my image here and I can add I can move these values, this curve value, right? I can either take the center here and I can plunge the center further into, meaning the midtones in our image. I can take the midtones, right? So the midtone would be this range, and I can move it further into the green. And as I do that, what it's doing is it's correctively adding green to this image as a means to correct, right, or to sort of remove some of these really intense magenta values. Just to display the inverse, if I was to take these values and put them further into the magenta, right, you could see that that's almost like a A24 horror movie. It's very purple. Now, if I was to take these, so that's the midtones would be interacting with somewhere in the center, adding these little curve nodes and pulling them into those values. What I can also do is I can take their endpoints, their horizons on either end, and I can pull these values up. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm taking these shadows and blacks and I'm pulling those shadows and blacks into the green. And I can do the same by taking these whites, right? And doing that as well. And so this image is now more green than it appeared before, but it also takes a lot of those values, those like pink values that we saw before. And actually, what we might do is we might remove a little bit of those values and just add a slight curve in the center here. And that adds a lot of the green back into this landscape here and formally corrects based on this value, this existence of a lot of magenta in our image. So if we show that original value and then our current values, again, subjectively, completely different image. But I think most of you would say that if you were looking at this, if you were experiencing this landscape, it probably looks something similar to what you're seeing here rather than something that we'd see right here, So there's a way to correct based on the presence of these particular colors in our image based on these channel corrections here. And so a cool thing to know is that when I navigate away from that channel, right, it's remembering, because it's an adjustment layer and it's non-destructive, it's remembering these channel values. This also means that even though that I've been interacting with this green channel and its corresponding opposite, magenta, it doesn't necessarily mean that I can't also interact with other spectrums as well. For example, if I wanted to pull more yellow into my image, I can still do that by interacting with the blue spectrum on its own. Or inversely, I can still interact with the red spectrum on its own by pulling these values, either the midtones or the highlights or the shadows, into their corresponding fields. You can see that when I pull these further into the cyan area, the shadows here, look, this, I'm adding essentially more cyan to the shadows here by pulling this further to the right. That's a completely different thing. That experience right here is super blue in the shadows here. And so what we're pointing out to, and what we're kind of getting to, is that by interacting with these colors, especially on the shadows and highlights, what we're doing is very similar to adding a gradient map, where a gradient map forces a particular color into the highlights and the shadows in our image. By interacting with the curves, we're doing that in a very similar way, but very gradual, not as egregious as interacting with something like a color map that completely, alters all of the colors in your image. This preserves values as well. But also, by interacting with these, we're also gaining the ability to sort of make changes to this image that also change the mood of the image significantly. So when you hear the term color grading, being communicated in photo editing or in videography, what they're referring to is changing these shadows and highlights as well as midtones, but to a lesser extent, to get these really dramatic effects that change the mood of your image. And as we've been interacting with this image, well, all we did was correct for this existence or this intense experience of magenta. So for this section, the takeaway is the opposite of red by means of correction is cyan. The opposite of green in this case is magenta, and the opposite of blue is yellow. And we have the ability to interact with and push these values into their corresponding midtones, highlights, and shadows by interacting with the channels within the curves tool. which is what brings us to now the next portion of this workshop where we get to look at color matching, taking a photo and matching based on those colors. I'm just going to take a sip of coffee here and answer Marissa's question. Marissa's question is, why doesn't the histogram adjust? Oh, right. Yeah. So when you change these values, that's a really good question. I think it's a question where it's not necessarily about actually the histogram itself, because if we were to pull open the panes tool, we can add a histogram, and this histogram represents all the cumulative changes in our image. For example, if we were to go into this red panel and pull more blue in, you can see that histogram adjust and change in real time. But for the purpose of this interactive window, I think what it's trying to do is, because you're making an active adjustment and an adjustment that is still editable. So Marissa, when you come back into this image and edit these values at the same time at a different time, these values are what we're sort of suggesting as a stable point to edit from. So if this histogram was changing actively throughout the editing process, then it would make it very hard to sort of visualize your image. If what you're asking is, hey, why don't I have an edited histogram that changes in real time? I would consider just adding the general edit histogram to see those changes. Are these opposites similar to a color wheel? That's a good question. It depends. I think they are, but I'm forgetting, because a color wheel might not be representing a color in a RGB spectrum. But typically speaking, this C, Y, and M, this cyan, yellow, and magenta, at least for digital representation of color, functionally works as an opposite. And so and also CYM is ironically, it's how ink DeskJet printers, cyan, yellow, magenta, black, how they interpret sort of RGB values. And so I think probably, and the answer is yes, and I'm sort of figuring this out in real time with you, but I think the reason why is because CMYK printers probably take and interpret RGB values to represent the correct amount of cyan, yellow, and magenta to how to present and essentially replicate RGB values, which a printer can't interact with because it's a light. It's a way of interpreting color through light, whereas cyan, yellow, and magenta also can be a way of interpreting light, but it's also a method by which most printers print in color. So a soft yes to that, but not necessarily certain of that. But as far as your editing process is, yeah, there are other opposites. Okay, so let's talk about the next process. I'm just going to go back to manage mode here. Oh, let's actually save this as a ACDSee file, just so let's corrective. Let's just save it as a corrective image. I actually want to go back to our original image as well and talk a bit more about that. Yeah, that is exactly right, CB. Yeah, CB's just saying that that there is the cyan, magenta, and yellow, which are sort of the opposite end of the RGB values. And in this case, when we're looking at it and we're interacting with it, we're interacting with the curves panel as you can add it or subtract rather from those values. So by adding the opposite value, it subtracts the formative value. So okay, so let's go back to edit mode here, and we're going to go back into this original image, and we're going to explore this. This is a great image, actually, just because it has such distinct colors in the foreground and background. So let's talk about this. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this base image, and let's actually talk about color matching now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 2 blank layers. Because all I want to do is have a reference color to interact with. So the highlights in my image are definitely going to be these spectrum here, these kind of colors, whereas the shadows and blacks in my image are going to be these colors. What I want to do is consider that probably this color, these colors are going to be the color that we're examining as a highlight color. And the reason why is because it is the light that's actually reflected off of a metallic surface. Or some of these colors in here represent a pretty true to our highlight color. What I want to do is I want to take this color. Let's actually use this exactly with our color picker. So this tool right here. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to take this color and I'm going to apply it to I'm going to put it into one of my blank layers here. So all I did was use the eyedropper color to select I guess in this case, a highlight color, and we're interacting with a blank layer. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to use this um, rectangle tool here, and let's make sure that we're interacting with this color. Here we go. Actually, it's fine with the border. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to place a little, oops, that's definitely the wrong order though. There we go. Let's try that. There we go. I'm just going to use this little rectangle tool here. This is somewhat of an unnecessary step. We can use the eyedropper tool and just reference this by eye, but I'm just going to add it to the image here as well, just to use a reference photo, or rather a reference color here, because this is solidly that one color. But basically what I did was color pick here. And what I can also do is once I have color picked in my image, I've made a selection, it'll pop into my foreground color and I can reference that foreground color this way. So this particular foreground color is a red color. It's like a soft red color, but it's a soft red leaning on the magenta spectrum here. So what we're doing is we're treating this color almost like a highlight in our image. And we're going to use this color to apply to essentially to correct, or rather to copy or match this color in other images. So I guess the main point that we should note is that the color that we're adding is really high in this spectrum, in that it's like closer to 255 in terms of its hue. It has a middling saturation and it has decent brightness. So, but it's kind of a pinky red that we're adding here. And then I'm just going to go to my second layer here, and I'm just going to take in a shadow, kind of a darker color here. Yeah, let's take in one of these guys. And we'll have a look at this color. So this is a blue, it's a really dark blue. So we're interacting with this light red cyan, or pushing more of that, red and magenta into the highlight. And we're going to be pushing these sort of dark blues into the shadows. So I'll take this color and we'll just draw it on. Oops. There we go. I'll draw that on here as well. And so now we have this sort of like reference color to interact with and to consider as, I might actually choose even a lighter shadow here, because this might be too dark for what we're doing. I'll just delete that layer. Add a new layer. And we'll apply this guy right here. Is that a better color? Oh, here we go. That's better. Okay. That's much better. That's an easier color to see. It's not just too close to a true black here. So, okay, so we have sort of these reference colors here. This is useful. So if I was to navigate back to the curves tool, right? And if I was to make a curve that would apply, in this case, this is for color matching, so we're going to have to go into another image to do that. But what we're going to do is we're essentially going to make a curve that applies to these two images right here, or these two colors right here. One where we're adding a pink to this sort of light magenta pink to the highlights, and one where we're adding this cool kind of almost slate blue to the shadows. So we can navigate to another image, but we'd lose these guys right here. So maybe what I'll do is I'll just add a image to our layer here, and we can sort of explore this and try to see if this color matching works. Now, again, we don't need these. This is sort of unnecessary, but we're just trying to have some sort of stable method of seeing what color we're interacting with here. So we'll just add a photo. Let's see how it works. Yeah, this is good enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to place and resize my image here. Looks like they're roughly the same orientation. They might even be the exact same orientation. And I'll just place it on here. And I'm just going to slide it underneath those two colors right here. So what we have is we have our original image. right here. We have our color that we're going to correct right here. And then we have our, I guess these two little guys right here, which are just these sort of sample colors. So we can see what, color is the color that we're going for, or the ideal, or what's the word for it? The target color. That's the word we're looking for. So what we'll do is underneath, or rather over top of this landscape image right here, it's important that it's not over top of these two guys right here, because by changing the channels in the curves adjustment, we would also be changing these guys as well. But really what we want to do is you just want to make sure that our curves adjustment is placed over top of our landscape image right here, the one that we're correcting from. And then let's play around with, first and foremost, probably magenta. So we're going to go into, actually, let's go into red, and we'll start there. We'll add this red, and we'll add some magenta to the highlights. So what that would look like is we take our curves adjustment here, and what we want to do is we want to add red to our highlights. Keep in mind that we're kind of trying to get a color that's closer to this. And then what we also want to do is we want to also add a green rather as well, because the green here, or sorry, we're going to lower the green value. We're going to add in magenta, because our red was a combination. As we said, it was very close to the red end of the spectrum. It was very close to the magenta end of the spectrum. And so if we take this and we plunge those values into their corresponding magentas and reds, it looks like we want to add a bit more red than, yeah, there we go. A bit more red than magenta here. And then what we can do is we can actually just take this object, this little pink guy here. Once we navigate away from curves here, we can take this guy and we can kind of move it to a highlight, and can see how we're doing. What would be a good highlight in this image here as a reference? We can just sort of play around with this and see where it's coming closer and closer to these values. I'll just move it there for now. This is kind of interacting as a highlight. Now, these values are not going to be perfect, right? You're not going to match it exactly, but the point here is that because the lighting conditions, the brightness values are going to be really different in your image from one image to the next. But you're going to get it pretty close. You're going to get a pretty close one by interacting with these curves in this way. So, and the other thing we can consider too is we can interact with the overall curves of the image, the overall brightness, probably last to sort of really sink those values in. But yeah, if we were to go even more, even more intense in those values, you can start to see these colors be really, really similar, right? We're starting to see the similarity of that. And so that's based on that original image, the highlights from that original image. Okay, so let's consider the shadows now. Let's sort of look at the inverse of this. And so the shadows are really blue, so let's add more blue to the shadows as a start. What else is going on in this color? It looks like it's high blue and green values, so we might add a bit of green as well to the shadows, but we're going to add less than the blues. It looks like, as far as this blue is concerned, it's obviously a darker blue because it has a lower saturation, but it looks like the actual blue value is a value of 60, where the green value is a value of 30, and then the red value is a value of 17. So if we add maybe green and blue to this, then we're probably going to get a pretty faithful representation of this color. So we'll take our blue values, and again, we're looking for this particular color in one of our shadows. So we'll see it start to appear in a shadow. So I'm going to take this blue value, and I'll move it into the shadows. How far up do we want to go? That seems too much. Probably about there. And if we take our green value, just add this into our shadows a little bit. What is that? Is that roughly half? That's pretty close to roughly half. And then if we take this red and just add a tiny bit of red in there. And so this was representing, I guess, that 17 that we're seeing here. The 30 is the green, and then the 60 is the blue there. And then what we want to do is, once we've got that color, which I think this is a pretty faithful representation of that. Let's have a look. So that's getting pretty close to, this is maybe the mirror is a good representation of this. So if we zoom in, really zoom in on these two, right? Again, the goal is to be very close, not exact. These kind of highlights that we're seeing here, that's pretty close to this color. This is a really good representation of it. And all we're doing is kind of using these curves, the sort of opposites, or pushing this sort of light into this area to get more of that particular highlight, more of that particular shadow. And if we navigate over to the blue here, you can see again, like again, pretty close. Like that's a pretty faithful representation of this color right here. Pardon me, maybe the last thing that I would do with this image is I would interact with the overall curve, right? So the overall brightness of our image here. So this last curve. And so what we can do is, well, we can do a couple things. The first thing we can do is we can take these values and we can just overall make the image have darker, or have rather more shadows, right? But that doesn't look like it's a very good solution. It looks like it's mostly in the midtones that we want to apply this adjustment. And we might just want to apply like a little standard S curve over our image. An S curve is this curve where it looks like we're adding a little bit of highlights here, and we're reducing, or rather, sorry, increasing the amount of shadows and increasing the amount of highlights in our image. And that's looking like pretty good. Maybe even just the shadows. Let's see. Yeah. So all I'm doing here is I'm reducing the amount of highlights in my image, because if you remember in our previous image, there was very few whites or brights in our image. And there was much more, much the way that this histogram looks. So from here, what we have is okay, let's go back and talk about this, because all we're doing right now is correcting the last little values here. But from here, what we have is, based on our initial image, we sort of determined, okay, well, our highlights kind of look like this. Our shadows kind of look like this. And what we did is we took our next image, this image right here, and then we applied a curve adjustment that sort of kept those colors in mind. And again, what we did is we kept these on the artboard here. Completely not necessary. We could have just done this by eye or through memory, but I like adding these in. And the reason why is just because it provides a platform to kind of remember, and also to reference based on the image. We can glide these over to the highlights, and we can glide these over to the shadows. And again, all I did there was add a blank layer, and then by copying with the eyedropper tool, copying the color, all I did was just make these little rectangles that had the fill color represented there. So from there, what we did is we add this curves adjustment, and this curves adjustment represents these additive and what we're adding to our image, these new channel adjustments to sort of represent or reflect the original image. So what we did here is we knew that the highlights had lots of red in it, so we bumped up the red intensely. And also corresponding with the highlights, we knew that there was quite a bit of magenta in those highlights, so we increased the magenta by interacting with this curve. Meanwhile, we also dealt with the shadows by interacting with the green, so we increased the green in the shadows, and we really increased the blue in the shadows as well. While minorly increasing the reds in the shadows. And then the last thing we did is we just took the curves tool, and we adjust the curves in such a way that the overall brightness in our image is slightly reduced. And I'm just kind of pulling slightly down on the midtones in my image to get like a little bit of a curve going on here as well. So we're starting to pull in a little bit of shadows, a little bit of midtones in the center of our histogram here. Okay, so Misty says, fantastic idea. Would like to spend hours at Plasma. Now, yeah, it's very warm. It's very warm. Has a cool, and so like when you are interacting with movies, right? When you see movies, color grading is such a part of film nowadays, right? And always has been, but it's especially when you go to see a movie, you'll see the color grading in the image. You'll see what they're doing to the highlights, and you'll see what they're doing to the shadows. If you were to take a still from a movie that you really like, you can copy the color grading from it, right? if you're watching a movie on your computer, take a screenshot and then color grade based on that screenshot. This is very possible, very doable. So the last thing I want to show you, and one that's really, really cool, is that we can actually save this curve. We can save it as a lookup table. So for now, let's save this image. Let's save this as, so it's not a correction, it's a color match. I will just save this as a color match. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this curves adjustment and I'm going to save it as a lookup table. What a lookup table is, it's literally a color grading, and it allows you to apply this color grading to other images. And it also allows you to share color gradings as well. So you can export and import these color gradings. In actuality, we even have a place on our film community right now where you can share color grades. So if you go to Creative Assets here, Creative Assets allows you to upload color grading, lookup tables, actions, presets, etc. And this gives people the opportunity to use these color grades that you've created, or for you to use others that other people have created. So if you're ever looking to play around with color grading, I would interact with this Creative Assets panel and share some of the stuff you're making. But we're going to show you how to do that. Okay, so I'm going to navigate back to this image here. What we're going to do is we're going to take this curves adjustment that we're looking at right here. I'm going to navigate to Tools, Create a LUT. So again, all a LUT is it's like creating a photo filter, a savable and repeatable color filter. So I'm going to click on Create a LUT. My description will be, let's say, yeah, how to describe this. Let's just call it pink magenta filter. Pink magenta filter. I just made this, Adam. And then the format doesn't matter. We can save the quality as, let's save it as high. Ooh, maximum. What does maximum do? Ooh. Yeah, so Misty says, we'll borrow the layer 1 and 2 idea. Yes, a lot. I'm frequently interrupted when working with photos, so having something outside my memory is worth... Oh, I see. Yeah, yeah. Well, this is a really powerful tool, too. This doesn't see enough use. So I'm going to create my LUT here. I've saved a little description of it. Actually, it should be pink/magenta highlights, slate shadows. Let's see if it'll let me save it with a comma in there. Nice. So then it gives me the ability to save it under this folder, this LUTs folder that exists on my in your ACD systems folder tree here. And I'm just going to save this as we'll actually call this warm light LUT. And I don't have any warm lights. Good, that's fine, and we'll save it. So from here, again, what the LUT is actually saving is it's saving any adjustment layers that your image that interact with light. So I don't think exposure is captured, or maybe it is, but curves definitely will be. Light EQ, white balance, vibrance, color EQ, probably levels will all be something that LUTs can save. And then what we can do is we can, you can see that when we go to add a color LUT, so you can import a LUT. So you can import one of your friends' LUTs right here, or someone from the community. Or I can go and I can select a LUT that I already have made, which is this warm light one. And as you can see, if I add it again, it's further emboldening those colors. The other thing we can do is we can go to, let's see here, the color LUTs menu. Where is it here? There it is. Click on this guy right here. And from this color LUT section, we can import, as well as there's a way for us to export them. Where is it here? Where is the LUT exporting method here? Oh, exporting is saving the LUT. What am I talking about? Yeah, so basically what you would do is you could go to the import panel right here, click on LUTs, literally just copy and paste this LUT and just save it somewhere in your desktop that you find useful, and that's how you would go about sharing it. But the other thing we can do is we can take this LUT that we've already made, right? And if we navigate to a different image in our folder here, so that one's this one, we can apply this LUT to all of our other images. So we have our image right here. Let's take a look at maybe at applying it to this cityscape here and see how it does. And we can apply it by clicking on the LUT panel at the bottom right-hand corner and just adding it. And there it is, the color LUT with the warm highlights and the darker blue colors in the background. So we can see how it's dramatically changed this image based on that curve adjustment that we've made. And I can save this image as well. I'll just save it as color match 2. And so we can start to see, we'll show a before and after, I guess, of these adjustments. Okay. So if we go back to the manage mode now here, when it's done loading, it's taking its time. There we go. So we can look at, I guess, the before and after here, here, and here. And if I go to compare images, there should be a way. Ooh, I forgot that it doesn't go on the other panel here. Hold on. Let's, how do I share that? Oh, you know what? Let's just do it this way. Let's just do it through thumbnails here. So we can showcase that this, was our original starting image, and then we color corrected in this image. And then this is our original image that we worked with right here. And then based on our color matching, we made something like this, right? And then once again, we took that color LUT and then we applied it to this image right here. So we're getting this effect out of this image. And I guess finally, let's apply the color LUT to this image as well. I wonder if it'll let me, I didn't make an action of it. Let's maybe see, I can create no, I have to go in and edit it. That's fine. But we can apply this color LUT to this image as well and see what it looks like. And sort of, you get the idea that it looks very nice. So, okay, just to recap, what we talked about a little bit today is we talked about color fidelity and color matching based on the qualities of a reference image. And so our reference image is that original starting pink image that we were like, oh, we really like the highlights and shadows in this image. Your reference image could be a film you really like or another photographer's work that you really like, and you can start to engage with their sort of color profiles or channels that they work with. And then from there, all we did is we took those values and we sort of made a little reference color, like just using a rectangle, a reference color to hold on to in our image. And used the curves tool to enact those colors to create them. So if we're looking for that pinky highlight there, all we're doing is adding a little bit of red and adding a little bit of magenta, right? And if we're looking for that slate color, well, we're just copying the values of the color. So if the color is green but mostly blue and a little bit of red, that's what we did. Color matching is a very interesting way to add certain colors into an image, but we can also subtract those colors from an image. And when we were looking at that corrective adjustment, like this one right here, all we did was take the color that we said, like this magenta color that we're seeing, and we can say, hey, you know what? We can tone that back. We can add more of its opposite, that green color, the green opposite of magenta in, to produce a correction that really is appealing to in our image and maybe makes it look a little bit more natural to the eye. You can't edit a created LUT, CB. That's a great question. You can't tune one. You'd have to use you'd have to go about creating a ACDSee file that you've saved a LUT from, and then you'd have to make edits to the original ACDSee file and then save the LUT. The LUT itself is not editable, unfortunately. It kind of flattens the adjustments. And then the other thing we talked about today is we talked a little bit about RGB values and HSB values, which if you were to ever click on the foreground color, I would spend some time playing around and just feeling through this custom foreground color picker, because these values mean something. The hue has a certain value that tells you what color it is, and then saturation and brightness can tell you so much about a color you're looking at. Vice versa, when we use these values, we can also those HSB values can be interpreted, or rather are interpreted, as a particular RGB value. So there's a certain amount of red, there's a certain amount of green, there's a certain amount of blue in those HSB values, and that's what is presented to you in that pixel. So all of this, very, very useful, very important tools, and familiarize yourself with the color picker and the foreground color tool. Yeah, that covers everything I wanted to talk about today. This workshop will be uploaded soon. I have to do that today, actually, and I also have to upload a previous workshop, but that covers it for today. I really appreciate participating. If this workshop was helpful to you, let me know. Send me a little message over Connect or something like that. I always appreciate a kind word or something like that when someone when this was useful to you. And as always, if you have something that you'd like covered, this entire workshop was a user suggestion. I wouldn't have done this if it wasn't for someone like yourself who was asking for it. Also, I went through the software much like any of you would do, and I learned all of this. I spent several hours one day learning how to color match, and based on someone's suggestion, and that's what I came to you with today. So. Peter, thank you. Anne, thank you. David, thank you. Chris, thank you so much. John, thank you. LJ, thank you. Laurent, thank you. CB, thank you again. Marissa, thank you so much. Not thank you. Like I said, I'll upload this. I'm going to upload it today. I think it's a pretty good topic, and again, something that somebody wanted. So if you want to contact me, you go to ACDSee Connect, go to our workshops pane. If you go to a past workshop or a current workshop, you can always just message me right there. Otherwise, I'll be in the members list. So, and I will have this uploaded soon. Yeah, thank you all for participating. I'm probably going to log off now and do what I said I was going to do. So I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I will be probably scheduling another workshop for probably the 30th. It looks like Rodrigo's got one on photo editing basics on the 23rd. So add yourself to that. And then I'll be adding one for the 30th, topic to be determined. But like I said, if you want something covered, send me a message and I'll consider that. So thank you all. I will see you next time, and have a great rest of your day.